6 months later, Ava stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office, watching the first snow of the season dust the streets of Manhattan below. The custody case had been dismissed the week before, Daniel's claims rejected by a family court. Judge who'd found his 4-year absence and recent aggressive tactics more telling than his belated interest in fatherhood. The business war had ended differently than anyone expected. Daniel's company had indeed folded, but not because of Meridian's sustainable tech launch. Instead, a financial audit triggered by investor concerns had revealed the kind of creative accounting that made headlines and criminal charges. Daniel was facing fraud allegations that would likely result in prison time, making his custody demands moot, in ways the legal system would handle far more definitively than Ava ever could. She felt no satisfaction in his downfall. If anything, she felt a kind of distant sadness for the man who'd had everything: a successful business, a loving partner, a child on the way, and had systematically destroyed it all through selfishness and poor choices. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Marcus entered, wearing the charcoal suit she'd helped him pick out for his new job as environmental counsel for a major renewable energy company. The move to New York had been his choice, made after they'd decided to build a life together officially. He'd found work he loved, an apartment near them that would become their home after the wedding next month. "How did it go?" she asked, though his expression already told her. "Ethan officially has a new last name as of an hour ago. Ethan Carter Thompson." The judge said it was the fastest adoption hearing she'd ever presided over. Considering the circumstances, Ava felt tears threaten, the same emotional overwhelm that had hit her when Ethan had asked, with 4-year-old directness, why Marcus couldn't just be his real daddy like he was in his heart. The conversation about biology and love and the different ways families could be formed had been easier than she'd expected, partly because Ethan's world had always included Marcus as a central figure. And speaking of circumstances, Marcus continued, reaching into his jacket pocket. "I have something for you." The envelope was thick, official looking. "What is this? Open it." Inside was a marriage license, already signed by Marcus, waiting for her signature and a ceremony to make it legal. But attached to it was something else: a letter, handwritten in Marcus's careful script. "Ava, 4 years ago, you moved to Seattle broken and pregnant and determined to build a new life. I thought I was just helping a friend, but you gave me something I didn't even know I was missing: a family. I know the timing wasn't traditional. I know we did everything backwards, figuring out love while raising a child and building careers and healing from past hurts. But maybe that's exactly how it was supposed to happen. I don't want to marry you because Ethan is my son, though he is in every way that matters. I want to marry you because you're the strongest, smartest, most incredible woman I've ever known. Because you make me want to be the best version of myself. Because when I imagine the future, every good thing in it includes you. The ring is in the top drawer of your desk. I hid it there this morning. Will you marry me, Ava Carter? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that some stories have happy endings after all? All my love, Marcus." She was laughing and crying simultaneously as she opened the desk drawer, finding a simple solitaire diamond that caught the afternoon light streaming through her windows. It was perfect, elegant without being flashy, classic without being boring, exactly what she would have chosen for herself. "You know this is completely backwards, right?" she said, slipping the ring onto her finger where it fit perfectly. "Usually the proposal comes before the adoption paperwork. We've never done anything the usual way. Why start now?" She kissed him then, tasting possibility and promise and the kind of love that grew stronger under pressure, rather than cracking apart when they broke apart. Marcus was smiling that gentle smile she'd fallen in love with twice, once in college, when she'd been too scared to act on it, and again in Seattle, when she'd finally been brave enough to believe in second chances. "So is that a yes?" "That's a yes to everything. The marriage, the family, the life we're building together, all of it." Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan's teacher. "Ethan is so excited about his new last name. He's been telling everyone about the adoption and the wedding. You're raising a wonderful boy." They were raising a wonderful boy, she corrected silently, together, the way it was always meant to be. That evening, The three of them sat around their kitchen table, soon to be officially their table, in their home, with their name on the lease, working on Ethan's homework while planning weekend activities and discussing Marcus's cases and Ava's upcoming product launch. It was ordinary and extraordinary, chaotic and peaceful. Everything she'd never known she wanted until she'd found it. "Mama," Ethan said, looking up from his math worksheet, "at school today, Trevor said kids need to have the same last name as their parents, but I said families can be made lots of different ways, and what matters is that everyone loves each other. Was that right?" Ava exchanged a look with Marcus over Ethan's head, seeing her own amazement reflected in his eyes. Somehow, despite all their mistakes and secrets and complicated choices, they'd managed to raise a child who understood love better than most adults. "That was exactly right, sweetheart. Some families look one way, some look another way. What makes them real is the love and the commitment and the choice to take care of each other. Like us," Ethan said matter-of-factly, returning to his math problems. "Like us," Marcus agreed, reaching across the table to squeeze Ava's hand. Later that night, after Ethan was asleep and the dishes were done and the wedding planning magazines were scattered across the coffee table, Ava and Marcus sat on their couch, her feet in his lap, talking about the future in the way of people who'd learned not to take happiness for granted. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd figured this out sooner?" Marcus asked, absently massaging her feet. "If we'd been brave enough in college, or if you'd told me about Ethan from the beginning?" Ava considered the question, thinking about timing and readiness and the way some gifts only became visible when you were prepared to receive them. "I think we needed to become who we are now before we could appreciate what we have. I needed to learn that I'm strong enough to rebuild my entire life when necessary. You needed to discover that love isn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It's about showing up consistently, especially when things are difficult." And Ethan needed to know from the beginning that he was wanted and loved, even when the circumstances were complicated. Especially when the circumstances were complicated. They sat in comfortable silence, watching snow fall past their windows, each lost in thoughts about the path that had brought them here. Ava's hand trembled as she stared at Daniel's tablet screen. The romantic texts from Sarabi's 9 for glowing like neon betrayal in their darkened bedroom. The same Sarah he'd sworn was just handling our social media strategy, babe. The soft glow of the tablet illuminated Ava's face as she sat propped against the headboard, her 7-month pregnant belly making it impossible to find a comfortable position. Daniel had left the device charging on her nightstand before rushing out for another emergency investor meeting, his third this week. The notification had buzzed insistently, and thinking it might be important business news, she'd reached for it. Now she wished she hadn't. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Wear the red dress I bought you. Daniel, last night was incredible. When can we get away for a real weekend? I know the situation is complicated with the pregnancy, but I'm patient." Ava's marketing strategist mind, the same one that had built 3 successful campaigns this year, began cataloging the evidence with clinical precision. The timestamps showed messages sent during his supposed client meetings. The tone was intimate, familiar, the casual mention of her pregnancy as if she were merely an obstacle to overcome. She scrolled further back, her heart hammering against her ribs. Months of messages, photos she couldn't bear to examine closely, plans made while she was at doctor's appointments, getting ultrasounds of their child, the baby she'd been so excited to share with him, the future they'd planned in this expensive Manhattan condo, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. She remembered how Daniel had held her hand during the first ultrasound, how his eyes had filled with tears when they heard the heartbeat. The front door clicked open. Daniel's voice carried down the hallway, cheerful and oblivious. "Ava, I brought Thai food from that place you like. Extra spring rolls for my 2 favorite people." She set the tablet aside, her hands instinctively moving to cradle her belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing her distress. How do you confront someone about betrayal when you're carrying their child? How do you fight when you can barely stand for more than 10 minutes without your back aching? Daniel appeared in the doorway, his designer suit slightly rumpled, his dark hair tousled in that effortlessly handsome way that had first caught her attention. At a networking event 2 years ago, He was holding takeout bags and wearing that boyish grin that usually made her forget whatever minor annoyance had been bothering her. "How are my babies doing?" He set the food on the dresser and leaned down to kiss her forehead, then placed his hand on her belly. The gesture that once felt loving now felt possessive, performative. "We need to talk." The words came out steadier than she felt. His smile faltered slightly. "About what? Is everything okay? Is it the baby? It's about Sarah." She watched his face carefully, applying the same observational skills she used in focus groups. The micro-expressions that revealed truth behind polite facades. There it was, the slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible pause before he responded. "Sarah? Sarah from the marketing team. What about her? The Sarah who wants you to wear the red dress she bought you." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Daniel's hand slowly moved away from her belly. He straightened, and she could see him calculating, preparing his defense. It was the same look he wore during investor pitches when someone asked a difficult question about their burn rate. "Ava, I can explain." "Explain what?" "That you've been having an affair while I've been growing your child? That you've been lying to me for months? That every time I asked why you seemed distant, you told me it was work stress?" He sat on the edge of the bed, running his hands through his hair. For a moment, she thought she saw genuine remorse in his expression. It just happened. The stress of the company, the pregnancy, everything changed so fast. "Sarah understands the business world in a way that don't." Ava's voice cut through his explanation like steel. "Don't you dare make this about me not understanding your work. I built my career in marketing while you were still figuring out what a conversion rate was." The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Ava winced. Daniel reached for her, but she pulled away. "How long?" she asked. "Ava, how long, Daniel?" He looked at his hands. "For months, for months." Right around the time she'd started showing, when her body began changing in ways that made her feel both powerful and vulnerable. When she'd needed his support most, he'd been building an intimate connection with someone else. The Thai food grew cold on the dresser as they sat in silence, the weight of broken trust settling between them like a physical presence. Outside their window, the city glittered with 1,000 lights, each one representing lives being lived, dreams being pursued, hearts being broken and mended. Ava placed both hands on her belly, feeling the baby's movements beneath her palms. Whatever happened next, she had to think about more than just herself now. She had to think about the tiny person depending on her for everything: protection, stability, love. "I want you to leave," she said quietly. "Ava, please. Let's talk about this. We can work through this. I'll end it with Sarah. We can go to counseling. Think about the baby." "I am thinking about the baby. That's exactly what I'm doing." 3 weeks later, Ava stood in the empty condo, her suitcases packed and labeled for shipping. The movers had taken everything that mattered: her books, her artwork, the rocking chair her mother had sent from Seattle. She'd left behind the expensive furniture Daniel had chosen, the kitchen gadgets they'd registered for but never used, the life they'd built that now felt like an elaborate stage set. Daniel had tried everything: flowers, apologies, promises to change. He'd shown up at her office so many times that security had to escort him out. He'd called her friends, her parents, even her colleagues, painting himself as a man desperate to save his family. But Ava had made her decision the moment she saw those messages, some betrayals cut too deep for healing. Her phone buzzed with another text from him. "Ava, please reconsider. I fired Sarah. I'm in therapy. Don't take my child away from me." His child. Even now, he thought of the baby as possession rather than person. She deleted the message without responding. The pregnancy had progressed normally despite the stress. Her doctor in Seattle, Dr. Martinez, whom she'd found through extensive research, had assured her that the baby was healthy and developing well. She'd also recommended a therapist who specialized in helping women navigate major life transitions. "You're remarkably strong," Dr. Martinez had said during her first appointment in Seattle. "Many women in your situation feel overwhelmed by the changes. How are you coping?" "I'm focusing on what I can control," Ava had replied. "My health, my preparation for motherhood, my career transition." Because that's what this move represented: not just an escape from Daniel, but a complete reinvention. She'd accepted a senior marketing position with Cascade Technologies, a growing company that specialized in sustainable tech solutions. The role was challenging but manageable, with excellent maternity leave benefits and a progressive attitude toward work-life balance. More importantly, Seattle felt like home in a way New York never had. The coffee culture, the mountains visible from downtown, the pace that prioritized life over networking, it all appealed to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. She'd found a charming apartment in Capitol Hill, walking distance from Pike Place Market and several excellent parks, where she could imagine pushing a stroller someday. The one complication was Marcus. Marcus Thompson had been her closest friend. In college, the person she'd studied with, laughed with, shared her dreams with during long nights in the library. He was also the person she'd been secretly in love with for years, though she'd never found the courage to tell him. After graduation, their lives had diverged. He'd moved to Seattle to work in environmental law. She'd chased opportunities in New York. They'd kept in touch sporadically, holiday cards, and the occasional social media comment. When she'd announced her move to Seattle, he'd been the first to offer help. He'd driven her round to look at apartments, recommended doctors, even helped her paint the nursery a soft sage green that complemented the natural light streaming through the windows. "You don't have to do all this," she'd told him one Saturday afternoon as he assembled a crib she'd ordered online. He'd insisted on reading the entire instruction manual twice before beginning, a perfectionist habit she remembered from their college days. "I want to," he'd said simply. "You're starting over in a new city, pregnant and alone. What kind of friend would I be if I didn't help?" The word friend had stung more than she'd expected. After years of being with Daniel, charming, ambitious, ultimately selfish, Daniel being around Marcus felt like stepping into warm sunlight. After months in shadow, he listened when she talked, asked thoughtful questions, remembered details about her preferences and concerns. When she mentioned craving a specific type of pickle, he'd shown up the next day with 3 different varieties. "Just in case your taste buds change," he'd said with that gentle smile she remembered so well. It was dangerous. This growing warmth between them. She was vulnerable, pregnant with another man's child, rebuilding her entire life. The last thing she needed was to complicate things with feelings she'd buried a decade ago. But late at night, when the baby's movements kept her awake, she found herself thinking about Marcus more than she should. One evening, as they shared takeout Chinese food in her still sparse living room, sitting on the floor because she hadn't bought proper furniture yet, the conversation had turned personal. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed in touch better?" Marcus had asked, setting down his chopsticks. "If we'd made more of an effort after graduation?" The question hung in the air between them. Ava had wondered the same thing countless times, especially during the lonelier moments of her relationship with Daniel. But admitting that felt like opening a door she wasn't sure she was ready to walk through. "I think everything happens for a reason," she'd said carefully. "We both needed to become who we are now before we could really appreciate each other's friendship." "Friendship," he'd repeated, and something in his tone made her look up from her low mien. Their eyes met across the small space, and for a moment, the air felt charged with possibility. Then the baby had kicked so hard that Ava gasped, her hand flying to her belly, the moment broken. Marcus had asked if she was okay, if she needed anything. The conversation had moved on to safer topics: work, the weather, recommendations for pediatricians. But that night, alone in her new bed in her new apartment in her new city, Ava had allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to build a life with someone who truly saw her, who valued her mind as much as her beauty, who wanted to be a partner rather than just a provider. It was a dangerous fantasy for a woman 8 months pregnant with another man's child. But as she drifted off to sleep, her hand resting on her belly, she found herself hoping that maybe, someday, when she was ready, there might be room in her heart for more than just healing. The baby kicked gently, as if responding to her thoughts, and Ava smiled in the darkness. Whatever the future held, she was building it on her own terms now. That had to count for something. The custody papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier while Ava was helping Ethan get ready for school. She signed for them with steady hands, waiting until after she'd walked him to the corner where his school bus picked up before opening the envelope. Daniel was petitioning for paternal rights and joint custody, claiming he'd been systematically denied access to his biological child. The legal language was aggressive, designed to paint her as vindictive and selfish. There were allegations about her fleeing the state to avoid the father's involvement and using the child as a weapon in professional disputes. She called her lawyer from the taxi on the way to work. "This is exactly what we prepared for." Rachel Martinez assured her, "He has no proof of paternity, no established relationship with the child, and no evidence that you've prevented contact. In fact, his 4-year absence works in our favor. He wants a DNA test, which you can refuse unless a court orders it. And given that he waited for years to assert any parental interest, that's unlikely." But Ava knew Daniel's persistence, his ability to make problems bigger and messier until people gave in just to make him go away. She'd seen him use the same tactics with investors, partners, even employees. He was betting on her desire for privacy, her need to protect Ethan from drama. He was wrong. That afternoon, she called a press conference. "As some of you may know, I recently returned to New York after building a successful career in Seattle," she told the assembled reporters. "What you may not know is that I'm also a single mother, raising my son without support from his biological father, who has only recently expressed interest in being involved." She'd rehearsed this carefully with her PR team, focusing on themes of female empowerment and work-life balance rather than personal grievances. But the subtext was clear to anyone who knew her history with Daniel. The technology industry has made significant strides in supporting working parents, but single mothers still face unique challenges. We're often questioned about our commitment, our availability, our ability to handle high-pressure roles while raising children. I'm here to say that single motherhood isn't a limitation. It's a superpower. The questions came fast and pointed. Someone asked about Daniel specifically. She deflected smoothly. Another asked about work-life balance. She gave statistics about productivity and employee satisfaction in companies with progressive family policies. But it was the final question that caught her off guard. "Ms. Carter, would you consider reconciling with your son's father if he demonstrated genuine change and commitment?" For a moment, she thought about the easy answer, the diplomatic response that would keep doors open and avoid burning bridges. Then she thought about Ethan, about the lesson she wanted to teach him about self-respect and boundaries. "I believe people can change," she said carefully, "but I also believe that patterns of behavior, especially patterns that involve deception and abandonment, are strong predictors of future behavior. My priority is creating a stable, loving environment for my son. Anyone who wants to be part of our lives needs to earn that privilege through consistent, trustworthy actions over time, not grand gestures or legal threats." The press conference went viral within hours. #SingleMomSuperpower began trending on social media, with thousands of women sharing their own stories of raising children alone while building careers. Ava's carefully crafted message had struck a nerve, tapping into frustrations and experiences that resonated far beyond the tech industry. Daniel's response was swift and predictable. He called her cell phone 17 times in 2 hours, leaving increasingly agitated voicemails that her lawyer would later use as evidence of harassment. He gave his own interview to a business magazine, painting himself as a reformed man being denied access to his child by a vindictive ex. But the narrative had already been set, and public opinion wasn't kind to men who abandoned pregnant partners, only to return years later with lawyers and demands. The real turning point came 3 days later when Marcus called. "I saw the press conference," he said, his voice careful and measured. "You handled it beautifully." They were both quiet for a moment. Ethan was at a playdate, giving them rare privacy for a serious conversation. "Marcus," she began, then stopped. "How do you tell someone that the child they've helped raise, the boy they've taught to throw a baseball and read chapter books, is actually their biological son? How do you explain that you've been carrying that secret for years, not out of malice but out of protection?" "I need to tell you something," she said finally, "about Ethan. About that night, before I found out about Daniel's affair." Another silence, longer this time. When Marcus spoke, his voice was very quiet. "I wondered," Sometimes I'd look at him and think, but I figured it was wishful thinking. You wondered, Ava. He has my eyes, my mother's nose, the way he concentrates. When he's working on puzzles, that's exactly how I looked as a kid, according to my parents. And the timing, he paused. I did the math, but I didn't want to assume. I didn't want to complicate things for you. She felt tears she hadn't expected. I'm sorry. I should have told you. I was scared, and everything was so complicated with Daniel. And then when you were so wonderful during the pregnancy without knowing, it felt like I'd waited too long to say anything. Are you sure? Have you done a test? I'm sure, but we can do a test if you want proof. I don't need proof, Ava. I need to know what you want. What's best for Ethan? What's best for you? What she wanted. It was such a simple question with such a complicated answer. She wanted Ethan to grow up knowing he was loved and wanted. She wanted to build a life with someone who chose them every day, not out of obligation, but out of love. She wanted to stop carrying secrets that grew heavier with time. I want to tell him, she said, when he's ready. I want him to know that his father is the man who's been there all along, who chose to love him without conditions or legal obligations. And Daniel gave up any claim to being Ethan's father when he walked out. Biology doesn't make someone a parent, love does. Consistency does. Showing up does. I love you, Marcus said suddenly. I loved you in college. And I love you now. I love Ethan like he's my own, because he is my own, in every way that matters. If you'll have me, I want to make this official. All of it. Ava closed her eyes, feeling for years of careful control finally give way to the emotions she'd been managing and moderating and protecting herself from. I love you too. I always have. Then let's stop making this more complicated than it needs to be. Let's be a family legally, officially, completely. That evening, when Ethan came home full of stories about his friend's new puppy and plans for weekend adventures, Ava looked at him with new eyes. Soon, he would know the truth about his parentage. Soon, she would have to explain why she'd kept secrets and made the choices she'd made. But tonight, as Marcus arrived for dinner with flowers for her and a new book for Ethan, as the three of them cooked together and laughed over pasta that Ethan insisted on making extra cheesy, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the simple peace of being exactly where she belonged with exactly the people who mattered most. The custody battle with Daniel would continue. The press attention would eventually fade. The business competition would play out in quarterly reports and market share statistics. But this moment of ordinary happiness with her extraordinary family was what she'd been fighting for all along. 4 years later, Ava stood in the boardroom of Meridian Industries, New York's third largest tech company, reviewing the presentation that would officially announce her return to the city that had once broken her heart. As the newly appointed Chief Marketing Officer, she was about to launch a campaign that could revolutionize sustainable technology adoption and potentially destroy her ex-boyfriend's struggling startup in the process. That the irony wasn't lost on her. The market research is undeniable, she told the assembled executives, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent for years rebuilding herself from the ground up. Consumers are increasingly prioritizing environmental responsibility, but they need products that don't require them to sacrifice quality or convenience. Our new line addresses that gap perfectly. She clicked to the next slide, revealing projected market penetration that made several board members sit up straighter. We launch in 6 months. The campaign will position us as the obvious choice for conscious consumers who refuse to compromise. CEO Patricia Vance nodded approvingly. Excellent work, Ava. I'm confident you'll execute this flawlessly. How are you settling back into the city? Very well, thank you. My son is adjusting beautifully to his new school. She kept her tone professional, though mentioning Ethan always brought a smile to her face. At 4 years old, he was curious, articulate, and had inherited her analytical mind along with his father's, his biological father's kind heart. After the meeting, Ava returned to her corner office overlooking Madison Avenue. The view was spectacular, but she found herself missing the mountains of Seattle, the way the morning light hit Mount Rainier on clear days. She'd built a good life there, meaningful work, genuine friendships, a community that felt like home. Coming back to New York hadn't been easy, but the opportunity was too significant to pass up. And if she were being completely honest with herself, there was a part of her that wanted to face the ghost she'd left behind. Her assistant knocked and entered. "Your 3 p.m. is here." "Thank you, Jana. Send them in." But instead of the reporter she'd been expecting, Daniel Reed walked through her door. He looked older, she noticed immediately. His hair had begun to thin at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there for years ago. He was still handsome, still carried himself with that confident air that had once attracted her. But something essential had dimmed. The boyish charm that had masked his selfishness now seemed forced, desperate. "Hello, Ava." She gestured to the chair across from her desk, keeping her expression neutral. "Daniel, I wondered when you'd show up. You look incredible." His eyes scanned her face, her tailored suit, the office that spoke of success and power. "Motherhood agrees with you. What do you want?" He shifted in his chair, and she recognized the tells she'd once found endearing: the way he ran his hand through his hair when nervous, the slight tightening of his jaw when he was about to ask for something. "I know why you're here. The Meridian job, the sustainable tech launch. You're targeting my company. I'm targeting a market opportunity. If your company happens to be in that space, well," she shrugged. "Competition is healthy, Ava. My company won't survive your campaign. You know that. We're too small, too niche. Meridian has the resources to undercut us completely." She leaned back in her chair, studying him. "And you want me to what? Scale back our launch, choose different messaging, handicap my own company to protect yours? I want you to remember that we have a child together." The words hit her like ice water. For a moment, she almost laughed at the absurdity of it. How wrong he was. How completely he'd missed the truth that had been hiding in plain sight for years. But she kept her expression steady. "Ethan has everything he needs: a stable home, excellent schools, a mother who loves him unconditionally. My professional decisions have nothing to do with him. I want to meet him." Daniel leaned forward, his voice taking on that persuasive tone she remembered from his investor pitches. "I know I screwed up, Ava. I know I lost the right to be part of his life. But I've changed. I've been in therapy. I ended things with Sarah years ago. I want to be a father to our son. Our son." The phrase felt like fingernails on a chalkboard. She thought of Ethan that morning, carefully packing his backpack for his first day at his new school, his dark hair falling into eyes that were unmistakably Marcus's. The DNA test she'd never asked for, never needed, because she knew the truth of that one impulsive night in Seattle, just weeks before she'd discovered Daniel's affair. She'd never told Marcus. How could she? He'd been nothing but supportive during her pregnancy, helpful and kind without any expectation of more than friendship. When Ethan was born and the resemblance became undeniable, she'd made a choice to protect them both: Marcus from the obligation he'd never asked for, and Ethan from a biological father who might not understand or accept a child born from complicated circumstances. Only she knew the truth. Only she carried the weight of that secret. "You have no legal rights," she said finally. "You're not on his birth certificate. You never filed for paternity. As far as the law is concerned, you're a stranger." "Then let's change that. We can do a DNA test, make it official. I can pay child support, help with expenses. We don't need your money, Daniel. Everyone needs help raising a child, and I deserve the chance to know my son." Deserve. The word crystallized everything she'd learned about him, everything there. Relationship had taught her about the difference between love and possession, between partnership and control. "You deserve exactly what you earned," she said, standing up, "which is nothing. You chose Sarah over your family. You chose lies over truth. You chose yourself over everyone else, every single time. Now you're choosing to use a child you've never met as leverage in a business negotiation. That's not. This meeting is over." She moved to the door, opening it for him. "My assistant will show you out." He stood slowly, and for a moment she saw something that might have been genuine regret in his expression. "Ava, I know I can't undo the past, but if there's any part of you that remembers what we had, what we could have been, what we had was built on lies. What we could have been was destroyed by your choices. The only thing I remember is that I deserve better after he left." Ava sat in her office as the sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. How was Ethan's first day? He was so excited this morning. Dinner Sunday still on. She smiled, typing back, great. He made 2 friends already. Sunday sounds perfect. Maybe Central Park after. Perfect. Miss you both, miss you both. 3 simple words that held more warmth than any of Daniel's grand gestures ever had. Marcus didn't know he was Ethan's father, but he'd been more present in the boy's life than his own biological father ever could be. He'd taught Ethan to ride a bike, read him bedtime stories, shown up to every preschool play and soccer game, not out of obligation, but out of love for her, and by extension, for the child who'd become part of their unconventional family. The secret felt heavier now, here in New York where the past and present were colliding in ways she'd never anticipated. But some truths were more dangerous than lies, and some families were built on love rather than biology. As she packed up for the day, Ava made a mental note to review her legal documents. When she got home, if Daniel was serious about pursuing paternity, she needed to be prepared. But first, she had a 4-year-old to pick up from his new school, a boy who was excited to tell her about his day and probably covered in paint from art class. Some battles were worth fighting, others were worth avoiding entirely. The trick was knowing the difference.